Well, with me is Sakhr Al-Makhadhi, who's a Syrian journalist. So a propaganda win for the authorities in Damascus. But are they still bracing themselves for some sort of attack, do you think?
Of course they are. It's a short-term propaganda win and nothing more than that because, of course, you know, they'll feel emboldened by the fact that Britain's voted against this, but the airstrikes are still very likely to take place. They'll take place with American and French jets, most probably, and in fact, they'll probably take place earlier than they would have if Britain had voted for the action yesterday.
So you think it'll embolden them? Do you think that if it is proved that Bashar al-Assad was behind a chemical weapons attack, that they would think that they can act with impunity on something like that?
I don't know if we're actually going to get that proof that Bashar al-Assad committed these atrocities. You know, the UN investigators are looking for... Well, exactly. But the UN investigators are simply looking to find out whether there was a chemical weapons attack rather than point fingers of blame. Will he feel impunity to do this again? Well, you know, he's gone so far and killed so many people, allegedly, that I think he feels that he can now do anything. And if the attacks are simply symbolic and they're just to prove a political point rather than to make a military point or defeat any large chunk of the Assad military, then yes, he will feel emboldened because he still has the backing of Russia, China and Iran.
Stay with us, will you, Sakhr, because I think we can go to Yolan Nell, who joins us live now from Beirut. And Beirut, of course, no stranger, in fact, very much caught up in the sectarian conflict going on in Syria as well. What has the reaction been there, Yolan?
Well, there's been very little by way of official reaction, but certainly I can tell you here in Lebanon you will get contrasting viewpoints. There are those who would be for or against military action because they're basically for or against President Assad and his government, and these allegiances are largely decided along sectarian lines. But there is also, too, a general sense in Lebanon that any kind of military intervention in Syria, Lebanon's larger neighbour, would have a negative impact here. We've already seen large numbers of Syrian refugees flooding into this tiny country, and there's also been an increase in sectarian tensions leading to further violence in just the past couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, it was a Shia Muslim neighborhood of southern Beirut that was hit with car bombing, killing there more than 20 people, and then 2 car bombings in the north of the country outside Sunni Muslim mosques last week, killing more than 40 people. So a lot of reminders that it's very dangerous, this conflict that's happening in Lebanon and is closely caught up in the affairs of its smaller neighbour.
Yeah, OK, Yolan, thank you very much there in Beirut. Let's go back to you, Sakhr. Nobody knows how Bashar al-Assad will react to these strikes, if indeed they happen.
Well, exactly, and the question is what happens next? Because if these strikes take place and they are simply symbolic, as it seems that Obama has been talking up, then will the Assad regime feel so emboldened and portray this as such a propaganda coup that, look, I've survived Western aggression, that he is then able to strike harder and further at the rebels? Or will it go the other way, and will the regime feel shaken? Will we suddenly see a mass wave of defections once the American bombs start landing in Damascus, as we saw something similar when America invaded Iraq and what happened in Libya?
Have we seen any big fundamental changes in, say, the middle class, the business community in Damascus? How many of those people do you think are questioning now the leadership of Bashar al-Assad, somebody to whom they had to tie their economic lives?
Well, they did, and, you know, before the war we accused many of the elite of being close to the Assad regime. It turned out that they were just being pragmatic and looking after their wallets. Many of them left as soon as the fighting began, especially when the fighting encroached upon Damascus and when the fighting reached the suburbs, as it has done for most of the last year and a half or so. But in recent days, of course, many of them have been taking all of their last assets out of the country and have been leaving in droves. So, you know, there's really a massive brain drain in Damascus, especially in Syria as a whole, and I fear for the future of the country because these are the people who can rebuild the country when the war's over.
But still, the brutality, even of a conventional war, is still killing tens of thousands of people each month. Pictures which the BBC had yesterday of white phosphorus incendiary bombs being used on a school playground. When it comes, though, to the loyalty of the army and how much of the country Bashar al-Assad controls at the moment, What is the situation?
Well, the loyalty of the army was really in question in the early days of the war. For the first year or so, there were regular defections, high-level defections. But now I think it's shrunk down to a rump, strong core that doesn't seem to be wobbling at all. And that's why I question whether there is going to be some kind of change when the bombs start landing. But as to the future of the army, well, that's really impossible to tell. I mean, you know, the army is made up of so many competing units. It's not a homogenous body like the Iraqi army was or like the Libyan regime was. And it's, you know, one of the successes of Hafez al-Assad's regime, the former president, who was the father of the current president, one of his successes was building that competition into the regime so that no one part could take over another part, and so that it would have that longevity and could survive no matter what.
Okay, Sakhr Al-Makhadhi, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme.